mind warm-up, question number 1, like we just talked about, is directly off of the quiz. Now, one thing I noticed, people were trying to move everything over to the right side. If I do that, then my x squared becomes negative. I like to start the day with a positive thing, so I want to start my formulas with a positive number. So I'm going to move the x squared to the left side. So I'm going to add x squared. Now, in order to move a positive x over, I need to subtract x. So I have 3x squared minus 5x minus 8 equals 0. Now I have an x squared and an x I have to factor. So I'm going to cross out the 3 and multiply it with the 8. X squared minus 5x minus 24. Factor that into x minus 8. X plus 3. And now since I multiplied by 3, I do need to divide by 3. So once I factor it, that does give me 3x minus 8 and x plus 1. And then what I would do is set both of those equal to 0. So I get x equals 8 over 3. X equals negative 1. Now this was a common one missed in the first section. And where most people missed it was moving this x over. They added x, and so they had negative 3x here. So that would mess up the entire problem. Another thing people did, they forgot to divide right here by 3. Without doing that, I don't get my fraction. Remember, you can check your answer by graphing this problem and looking at your x-intercept right on the graph. Very quick way, right? Problem 2, most of you realize is directly off the homework. And this is a FOIL problem. 2 times 9 is 18. 2 times 6i is negative 12i. Negative 9i times 9 is negative 81i. Negative 9i times negative 6i is positive 54i squared. Okay? Now, the middle two I can combine. So I get 18 minus 93i. Positive 54i squared is what number? Negative 54. Number I squared is the same thing as negative 1. So now 18 minus 54 gives me negative 36 minus 93i. So, today we are going to simplify imaginary numbers. We've already added, we've already subtracted, we've already multiplied, so we only have division actually left in the way of operation. So, our first problem. 2 minus 7i divided by 1 plus I. So before we do this problem, let's review what we did last week. Last week we learned about square roots, right? And what can you never have on the denominator of a fraction? A square root, right? I don't see a square root up there, but I know something. I is actually what? Square root of negative 1, right? So technically, even though we don't see a square root here, technically this is a square root. Correct? So I need to get rid of it. So for a bonus point, does anybody remember what? No. Not quite. 5. Corey? Nope. Nope. Complex conjugate is what I'm looking for. Complex conjugate. Now, we briefly talked about that on Friday whenever I showed you the one problem that you foiled together and you got the number 5. And some of you looked at it and were giving it a nasty look of like, what did I do wrong? Really, you did nothing wrong, except that you actually found a complex conjugate. Well, the complex conjugate, we have to look at the bottom, and we switch the sign. So it's a plus sign right now. We're going to switch it to a minus. That's the complex conjugate. So if the bottom had been 20 27 plus 17i. I'd multiply top and bottom by 27 minus 17i. I just switched that sign. Okay? So what I'd like you to do right now is to FOIL the top together, then FOIL the bottom together. If I FOIL the top, I get 2 minus 2i minus 7i plus 7i squared. And on bottom, I get 1 minus I plus I minus I squared. Raise your hand if you had that so far. Okay, then you're on the right path. From here, if you don't want to have to rewrite it with every step, you can cross things out. If you can cross things out neatly. So negative 2i and negative 7i become negative 9i. What does positive 7i squared become? Negative 7. Now, notice when I cross that out, if Fallon is looking at it, she can still read that's positive 7i squared. She can still read that. If you cross it out and it looks like that, I don't give you credit. That make sense? Because I can't read what's underneath there. That's good. Just a nice little dash to cross it out. Okay, so now 2 minus 7 is what number? Negative 5 minus 9i. Now that's just the top. That's all I've done so far is FOIL and combine like terms on the top. Any questions so far? No? Okay, on the bottom, what's negative I and positive I going to happen? Good. So they cancel. And I squared, negative I squared is going to become what number? Positive 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. There's your answer. Now the only key thing here is this bottom number should be positive. We need to make it positive in some way. And we're going to see one on the next slide that it comes out negative, so we'll figure out how do I make it positive. So here's our next problem. Slightly different than the other one, right? Now, before we do this one, what would you do to get rid of that? What would you do to this problem?
Multiply it by the square root of 5 over square root of 5.
So you repeated what was on the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So what's on the bottom of this one, Caleb?
3i.
So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3i. There's no plus sign, there's no minus sign. I'll just use the exact same thing. Go ahead and distribute on top and multiply on bottom. So I'm going to distribute on top, and I get 27i plus 12i squared over 9i squared. So far makes sense? Okay, 12i squared is actually what number? Negative 12 plus 27i. One thing, remember, real numbers must be first, then imaginary numbers. 9i squared is what number? Negative 9. Because there'll be 9 times negative 1. So negative 9. Now, see how we have that negative on the bottom? We're not allowed that. We're going to get rid of that here in a second. But do you know that the number that goes into all 3 of these? 3. So normally I would just divide by 3, but I want to get rid of this negative sign also. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 3. What's negative 12 divided by negative 3? 27 divided by negative 3? And negative 9 divided by negative 3. That's your answer. That's it. If, let's say, there wasn't something in common like 3, okay, all you'd have to do is switch all of your signs. And that would also make that a positive on the bottom. I did. You got it. Any questions there? So officially you've learned to divide. So we've got one more topic to cover with imaginary numbers, finding absolute values. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to graph this. So I'm going to make myself a nice, pretty graph. The x-axis is now going to become my real axis, and the y-axis will now become my imaginary axis. So I've got a real part, I've got an imaginary part. Well, my real part is negative 2, and my imaginary part is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Negative 2, 5. I'm going to put a dot at that negative 2, 5. Everybody see how I got that point and where it came from? Anybody lost? Congratulations, you graphed it. That's all there is to graphing imaginary numbers at this point in your life. Now maybe in another class they'll go further with it, but as of right now, I just wanted you to see how that goes on a graph, because that's going to lead us into absolute values. Raise your hand and tell me the definition of absolute values. Distance from 0 is right, Corey. So I'm trying to figure out how far this point is from 0, right? I'm trying to figure out how far that slanted line is. Geometry, people, what is the word that Mr. D'Amico gives for this? Huh? Triangulate. He uses triangulate for this, doesn't he? For the rest of you, you probably won't use the word triangulate, and I'm fine with that. I try to look at it and see, what do I notice. I notice it's a triangle. I also notice that it is a right triangle. What formula did you learn in pre-algebra for sure? No. Perfect. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That is, all you're doing for absolute value here is using Pythagorean theorem. Now, how far is this right here? 2. Now you could use negative 2, or you could use 2. What's 2 squared?
4.
What's negative 2 squared?
4.
No matter what, it's 4. Okay, so I'm going to put 2 squared. How far up is this? 5, so 5 squared equals C squared. Take a few seconds to do the work. I get 4 plus 25 equals C squared. 29 equals C squared. Take the square root. C equals the square root of 29. So that's my absolute value. But wait, I put that square root sign there, right? It wasn't in the original problem. Why am I not giving a plus or minus on this problem? Haley? Okay, not quite. It's a distance from 0. That's a good thing. Okay, distance is always positive. I can walk around all day like this. It doesn't mean I'm losing part of my life, okay? I can walk around the whole day, and I'm not going to lose any part of my life, right? Not going to go backwards. I wish. It doesn't work though. On the same graph that you have there, graph this one, find the absolute value. So here I've graphed negative 6i. Raise your hand if you have that. Okay. So I'm looking for the absolute value now, right? Valerie, what's the absolute value again? Distance from 0. Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Distance is 6. Distance is always positive. Now, some of you are erasing. I'm guessing because you had some work. Raise your hand if you showed some work on that. That's fine. That's okay. This would be one problem if you don't show work. I understand. On the last one you had to show work, but let me show work. My A would be 0. B would be 6 equals C. 6 squared is 36. Take the square root. What's the square root of 36? Because I didn't move any way on the real line, so that's why that's 0. So I got that either way. Does that make sense? Any questions there? All right, want a clean sheet of paper for essential work?